My name's Laura Jeffrey and I'm the librarian at Wolfson College, and today I'm going to be giving a short presentation about how to write an abstract. We'll be specifically focusing on the Wolfson Research Event, but it will also hopefully be relevant to you if you're thinking of speaking at any other conference or if you're thinking about writing an abstract for a journal article. So first of all, just to cover some of the key points about writing the abstract for the Wolfson Research Event, we're looking for about 250 words, which isn't very many, maybe just 6 to 7 sentences. You'll need to also supply 5 key words, and this will help situate your research within the broader context of your own discipline, but it will also help flag up some of the key topics that might be included in your research, even if you don't use those words in your abstract. The audience will be interdisciplinary, and this is the big challenge, writing for people who don't have that background information that you do. It may be a very long time since they've studied your subject, and so you really have to be able to translate your research for the wider public. And then finally, you need to think about what sort of presentation it is you're going to be giving. Will you be giving a verbal presentation, standing up on the stage, talking to slides, or will you be creating a poster, a large poster, A0? With that, you also have the opportunity to talk to your poster. So it's not just about converting it into visuals, but it's also about being able to communicate it as well. You'll probably just have 1 minute or so to talk to the judges who will come around to look at all the different posters. But you'll also have a chance to answer questions from members of the audience. So when we're thinking about what an abstract is, it's not just a summary. Certainly when we read a journal abstract, it does give us an indication of the coverage of the paper, what happens in it, but there's something else there as well, particularly when we think about a conference abstract. You're trying to sell your work, you're trying to get people to come along to your session. And at a really busy conference, of course, people will have to choose between different sessions. They need to know that your session is going to be really, really relevant to their own area. Whereas with the Wolfson Research Event, people choose whether or not to come to parts of the conference. They might just come for a morning or an afternoon. They might come on one day, not the other day. So again, you want to sell your research. You want people to want to find out more about what it is you're studying. In terms of the content, we're going to look at a couple of different models to help you write it, but in theory, it should contain a little bit of all these. A bit of background information, your research questions, why you're doing your research, any findings. If you have been able to supply research questions, you might want to answer those questions if you're a bit further on in the process, but equally to think about the impact of your findings. And this is really important, the significance of your research. Why is it that you're doing what you're doing, and what changes is it going to make to your particular discipline? Now, I should say that, of course, for some people you may have just started on a research project, master's or PhD or undergraduate. For some of you, you might be right at the end of the project. So how the weight, the balance of your particular abstract will vary massively depending on where you are in that research journey. It might be that you just have a lot of background information because you've just started, or you might be able to look back across the whole project, and equally you might want to weight it more heavily towards the findings. But whatever you do, you want to make it engaging. And so we're now going to look at how you can make your abstract more of a short story. Now, Randy Olson was a scientist who then went into Hollywood and started making films. So he is really well placed to think about telling stories from your research. And he's written a brilliant book called Houston, We Have a Narrative. And it's a very engaging book, but ultimately he has a really great model for being able to distill down all the research that you're doing into just a couple of sentences. And he's thinking about the and, but, and therefore model, this ABT model. And what this does is, rather than just piling information on top of itself, so this happened, and this happened, and this, and this, and this, it's actually making it more engaging by using sort of building blocks for the story, giving you some sort of template to work from. So first, thinking about making a statement, then adding momentum to it, and something happened. And then this is the sort of the Hollywood bit where the conflict comes in, but something else happened, but he then wants to resolve it at the end, therefore. And so this is the point where you make your case for what you have done, what you've done to change, to answer those particular research questions. Now this is great structure for your abstract and of course ultimately for your presentation as well. You can then flesh this out in a little bit more detail. But if we look here at how that can be used to convey straight away the essence of what could be, a 10,000 word journal article or conference presentation. PhD graduates are highly trained members of society and they have a lot to offer the workforce, but they have trouble finding jobs that are suitable outside academia. Therefore, we created a machine learning algorithm that can find jobs for them. So it's a really concise way, really great at distilling down your research. And if you think about that, if you were talking to somebody about what it is you do, you could talk for hours and hours about it. But if they just wanted a really short answer, this would give you that structure. So now it's your turn. Perhaps just take about 5 minutes to make a statement about a problem that is out there. Add a bit of momentum to that. Add a bit of tension into it, the restricting factor, the conflict, by putting but in there, and then resolve it with a therefore. Therefore, what have you gone on to do? So just take a few minutes to do that, and you'll find that very quickly you've got something that you would be able to talk about with a structure. So the Wolfson model is a very quick, short way of getting a little bit of structure into an abstract. We're now going to look at a slightly more protracted and extended template for writing an abstract, and this is one from Professor Inga Muburn, and she suggests that there are 6 points that you could put into your abstract, and you can see if we had a sentence for each of these 6 points, you then have your 6 or 7 sentences for your Wolfson Research Event abstract. So we're going to look at these all in a little bit more detail now. So what we're going to do now is look at these in a bit more detail, and Inga Muburn's slides that she provides have examples for both humanities and social sciences, and also for STEM subjects as well. So she's taken a very surreal example of magical unicorn hair that has been discovered, and she's talking about it from these 2 different perspectives. And obviously the reason to do this is to take a step back, to abstract the whole process. But what it does do is it demonstrates how this template can be used for different disciplines, irrespective of the kind of convention, the writing conventions within your particular discipline. So we're going to look at the moves that you would make to be able to convey your research through this structure. So first of all, as we said, it's talking about the background information to your research, the wider debates. If you're at the very start of your research, you might want to weight your abstract slightly more heavily on this side because you haven't got your findings at this stage. But what is it? Why are you doing what you're doing? What's the gap that you've identified? And that gap is the focus of your research. So this is where you narrow down the focus. You talk about the fact that there's a big wider debate out there, and you're looking at one aspect of it. Now, of course, we've only got 10 minutes to talk about this in the Wolfson Research Event, so what you might actually want to do is just talk about one aspect even of your research rather than the broader picture. Now, the anchor for your research, that's the method that you're using. Now, for some people, a huge part of their thesis is about the methodology that they've chosen to use. They might be applying a methodology from a different discipline or a different sort of case study, and they might be trying to replicate the results that somebody else has produced, but in a different way, or they might be applying a methodology that hasn't previously been used in a particular context. For other people, it might have been quite clear the sorts of methods that you were going to use, and therefore it's a smaller part of your abstract. Now, if you're a bit further down the line in terms of your research, if you're a third-year PhD student, for example, you might have findings. As Mubin points out here, this is often left out, but of course, in a journal article or in a conference presentation, it shouldn't be like a murder mystery. It shouldn't be a grand reveal and we suddenly find out what's happened in your research. Lay it all out, be upfront. Hopefully that's exciting that you've got some findings. If you're earlier on in the research process and you don't have findings, I guess you could hypothesize about where your research might be going at this point. So if you laid out research questions at the start of your abstract, this is your point at which you might want to answer them, to make an argument, to be able to fill in some of those gaps, those questions. Equally, you may not have that much data at the moment, you may not be able to answer those, but again, you might be able to indicate where you think your research is heading. And then the final one of those 6 points is the significance. And I would hope that even if you don't have a huge amount of findings at this point in your research, you would be able to argue for the significance, what it is that you're doing, that you hope is going to happen, why you think this is going to change research in your particular field. I think this is a really nice point as well. The true value of research isn't what you actually found out. We've already talking about the findings, but it's what you're going to do with it, what other people might be able to do it, what the contribution is of your particular research project. And what you'll find out is that if you do write a little sentence for each of those 6 sections, is that you'll generate a tiny text. And the tiny text concept comes from work by Pat Thompson and Barbara Kaemler. They were working specifically with humanities, arts and social sciences students. But at the same time, I think it's totally applicable to the STEM field as well, particularly when you're thinking about writing in this interdisciplinary environment. And what the tiny text does is it sees that the abstract is its own genre. It's distilling down your thesis, your research project, and it guides you through the different moves. As we said, rather than just piling information on top of it, there's a story there. You can see the narrative arc of your research. Now, this is really great for planning, whether or not you're planning an abstract, or maybe if you're planning a chapter, to think about, like we said earlier, building a really tiny text, being able to convey in a couple of sentences what it is you're doing and where you're going with your writing. So I thought it might be quite good to try and put some of these templates into action and see if we can actually overlay them on well-written abstracts rather than working the other way around and starting with them. Here is an abstract that Mewburn has co-authored. And if we now overlay, first of all, the Olson model and then her own model, we'll see that there is a very clear structure to what's been written. So you can see here that actually it's very heavily weighted towards the start if we use the Olson model. There's a statement been made and we've added a bit of momentum, but, and the but's actually in the text, we haven't had to insert that. There's our conflict. There's an evidence base that's lacking. Therefore, what did they decide to go on and do? So that got them kick-started. So you can think about that Olson model. That might be your introductory couple of sentences. If we then look at it with her own model, you can see that actually it's weighted totally the other way. So there's quite a bit of contextual information at the start, locating the research project, and that's all that Olson bit. So that kind of fits neatly into the locate section. Then there's the particular focus, what they're going to be doing in their research project, the method that they use, and that's quite a significant section. Then they report, they don't particularly argue, they haven't introduced research questions, so they're not going to answer them. And then the significance, our model offers a new perspective. And I think that's great, so you can therefore see what the unique contribution is of this particular piece of research. So now it's your turn to have a go. Write out each of those 6 sections: locate, focus, anchor, report, argue and explain, and see if you've got something for each of them. Like I said, it might be a very small sentence if you're not at that stage in your research. You might have a couple of sentences at either end depending on where you are in your project. Okay, so perhaps maybe take 10 or 15 minutes over this exercise. If you like the idea of having a template, having some prompts to help you structure your abstract, you might want to explore a new app that's out there, To Write Abstracts. This is relatively new to us in the library. We haven't come across it before, so we're having a play around with it at the moment, but I would encourage you to have a look too if you like the idea of a template. And the way it works is very, very simple, as you can see. You choose building blocks, which are like questions in a questionnaire. So you would drag and drop them over. This will give you your structure, the kind of various areas that you want to talk about. You then answer those questions in the questionnaire. It will then merge them all together and it will create an editable chunk of text for you to go back to refine and to add a bit more nuance to. Here's a little bit more detail about each of those sections. So as we said, using those building blocks, converting your questions, with a little bit more information about how to go about answering those questions, which I think is really helpful. And then finally compiling them into a single large paragraph, takes away all the questions, takes away all the busyness of that, and then you can see the abstract in its own right and you can work through that and make some adjustments. Now, I mentioned at the start that as well as an abstract, we're looking for 5 key words that will help situate your research. within your own discipline, your own subject area. And I think a good way to start thinking about this, if they don't immediately jump out at you, is to think about the keywords that you would use to search for a relevant journal article or a book in a catalogue. When you're looking for something, you input a number of keywords, and you know that if you put in just one or two and they're very broad, you'll get huge numbers of results back. The more specific you are, the more keywords that you add, the more that you're able to drill down to the research that's really, really relevant to you. And so that's what you want to do. You want to provide those words that would help somebody else find this piece of research if it were in a database. So we could just think about the article, the abstract that we've just read, and we could think about the keywords that we could use for that. So these are some that jump out at me: the idea of graduate employability, not just any graduate, specifically PhDs. Skills development, we're looking at changing the curriculum, and we're using AI to do that. So those would be some that would jump out at me, but you might come up with other keywords as well. And this is an opportunity for a little bit more hands-on time in this workshop. Go to the A to Z database listing. As you know, we've got about 1,500 databases. They're in all different subject areas, so you might be more familiar with one than another, but perhaps Web of Science is great because it covers all disciplines, or Scopus, International Bibliography of Social Sciences, or PubMed, or JSTOR, all sorts of different databases. Search for something in your area, see what comes back. Is that the sort of research that you're looking for? Are those the sorts of keywords that you might attach to your particular piece of research? And then find a relevant record. And I've got a screenshot of one here, and you can see the author keywords at the very bottom: doctoral training, competencies, employability, career survey, PhDs, and then the database has actually added in extra keywords, this keywords plus. Now these are words that will crop up frequently in the piece of work. Got supervisors, doctorate, and skills coming in there as well. So these will be very bespoke, these will be particular to your particular research, but this is quite a nice way to do it if you're a bit stumped. I hope that gave you some useful pointers. It gave you a bit of structure to approach writing an abstract if it's something that you're not familiar with. There's also lots of other research resources out there as well. So I've mentioned one of Inga Mewburn's books, How to Fix Your Academic Writing Trouble, the Houston We Have a Narrative book. We've got lots and lots of books on writing in the library in the academic skills section, which is opposite my office and the borrowing machine. So have a look in there, and lots of them will have sections on how to write an abstract. There's a particularly useful website out there as well. But please do just get in touch, drop me an email if you've got any particular questions. Otherwise, good luck.